My name is Merrill James, and if ever there was a person who was completely alien to his family, it's me. I am the eldest daughter of two recognized doctors, Isabella and Adam James, people who have long lost the ability to see me as a person. Now I'm 32, but for as long as I can remember, I've always felt like an outsider in this house, like a splinter on the smooth skin of their orderly lives. They looked at me, but did not see me. Every look, every smile passed through me and sank somewhere in the walls, in the wallpaper, absorbed both silent contempt and ignoring me. Since the day my younger twin brothers Jason and Christopher were born, everything has changed. Their appearance seemed to block my access to parental attention, as if with their birth my invisibility became official. Because of this, I have been watching life since childhood, as if I were standing on the other side of a glass wall, and the more time passed, the more I realized that this barrier was indestructible. In childhood, these differences were expressed, perhaps imperceptibly, but for me it was still painful. While the brothers were getting big pieces of pie and new toys, I quietly averted my eyes, pretending that it didn't matter to me. I tried not to notice how my mother gave them a barely concealed smile, how my father nodded slightly, looking approvingly at their first steps, words, desires. My birthday always seemed to come unnoticed, slipping somewhere on the periphery of their attention. I will never forget my 12th birthday. For several months, I've been discreetly hinting that I'd like to get a painting kit. I saw it in the window of a small shop on the corner, an unremarkable set, simple paints and brushes, but for me it was a way to express my emotions, a dream beyond what surrounded me. I was so hoping that maybe something would change on this day. But when I finally opened my only gift, it wasn't the coveted set in front of me, but a boring math textbook that seemed to tell me, "Don't dream, Merrill, your interests don't matter." As I got older, the differences in our treatment only became more apparent. Family trips have always been planned around the interests of Jason and Christopher. If Jason dreamed of skiing, we went to the mountains. If Christopher wanted to surf, we ended up on the beach. My ideas have not been discussed or considered. I was humbly silent, preferring not to escalate the situation, but every time I felt a silent resistance growing in me, like a shadow growing inside me. When I turned 18, I found myself in love with the restoration of works of art. The local museum became my refuge, where I could immerse myself in the work of the masters of the past, admire the details that loomed under the shadow of the centuries, watching the painstaking work of the restorers. The hours spent among the old paintings brought me the peace and quiet I was so desperately looking for. At that moment, I knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to this. But when I shared my plans with my family, the response was hardly unexpected. Mom looked at me with a light laugh, as if I had announced that I was going to run away with the circus. "Art restoration, Merrill? This is not a real job." Her words sounded like a final verdict, like the chains she had placed on my dream. Jason, my brother, turned to me with a smug grin and added fuel to the fire. "Why don't you do something useful, like become a doctor?" There was pride on their faces, a special expression that I had never seen when it came to me. But even their contempt couldn't stop me. I was determined to follow my path. When the letter of admission to college arrived, with the long-awaited scholarship to study restoration, I practically flew up on the wings of joy. Almost out of control, I ran into the kitchen, waving the letter. My mother, barely taking her eyes off the medical journal, said dryly, "That's great, honey." At the same moment, she shared with much more enthusiasm the news that the brothers had passed the SAT exam perfectly. The day I left for college was full of cold indifference. With a rickety suitcase and an old laptop, I was preparing for a trip to a modest state university, which was far from luxurious, where Jason and Christopher studied. None of my parents even offered to give me a lift to the bus station, as if this moment didn't deserve any attention. College has become a mixed experience for me. a quiet but persistent conflict between my newfound freedom and constant struggle. For the first time in my life, I could live without the persistent shadow of Jason and Christopher, without having to fight for approval or scornful praise. Studying has become my solace, my passion and, to some extent, my protection. A scholarship and a small part-time job allowed me to make ends meet, although they hardly allowed me comfort. While my brothers basked in the opportunities paid for by the generosity of our parents, I limited myself in everything, often saving on simple pleasures that were commonplace for other students. Family calls only reinforced this sense of difference between our lives. I listened to the fashionable student parties my brothers shone at, the expensive spring break trips, the prestigious internships at major hospitals, all generously sponsored by my parents. While I was poring over my educational projects, the restoration of works of art became something more than just a profession for me. It was my escape, my quiet world, where I could completely disappear, forgetting about the opinions of others. There was something almost magical in this process, to restore the beauty of what was lost, slowly revealing the hidden depth under layers of dirt and oblivion. I learned patience and dedication, and that's what gave me the strength to continue despite the difficulties. In my last year, I managed to get an internship at a small but respected museum. The job was far from glamorous. Most of my duties were cleaning and organizing exhibitions, but this was my chance. It was the first real step in the direction of a dream, and I rejoiced like a child at the thought that I was now officially involved in the world of art. Full of enthusiasm, I called home to share this joy, but my mother's reaction turned out to be predictable and painfully familiar. "It's nice, honey," she said, as if just for the sake of decency, and immediately turned the conversation to Jason's research paper, which was being prepared for publication in a prestigious medical journal. She spoke with a pride that I had never heard before when talking about me. When I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of resentment and anger growing in me, but this time something changed. In the depths of my disappointment, I felt a small spark of stubborn determination. I looked around my cramped dorm room, the walls of which were decorated with clippings from museums and antique reproductions that I had collected over the years. Art books were stacked on my desk, and an unfinished restoration project took up almost all the free space on the floor. It was my world, my fortress, created by myself, and nothing could destroy it. I muttered into the void, "Forget them. I don't need their approval." But somewhere deep inside, I knew that their recognition was still important to me. The secret desire to hear words of approval from parents one day remained like a dream that had not come. Later, on one of our rare visits home, we gathered for dinner at a restaurant. Me, my parents, Grandma Julie, and, of course, my successful brothers. We were sitting at a long table, and when it came to me, my father barely looked up from the menu and coldly asked, "What's next, Meryl?" I felt myself tense up, gathering all my courage to answer. "I've been offered a job at a museum in Los Angeles," I said, trying to sound confident. My father's face frowned at this. "Los Angeles is an expensive city. How much are they offering for this job?" His voice sounded like a dry sentence. I could only mumble a figure, a modest starting salary, knowing in advance that this would disappoint them. The rest of the dinner turned into an echoing web of reproaches and advice about real life, filled with subtle remarks about the need for a more practical path, based on comparisons with the outstanding achievements of Jason and Christopher. I felt that cold, unbiased tone engulfing me, like a long familiar and unwanted vortex, bringing me back to the life I was trying to escape from. When we left the restaurant, Grandma Julie called me aside. She looked at me for a long time, and there was a quiet strength in her eyes that I had never seen in other members of our family. "Don't let them dim your light, my dear," she whispered, putting a small envelope in my hand. "Go to Los Angeles and pursue your dreams." I could barely keep from crying, clutching this little gift to my chest. There was a check inside the envelope, enough to cover the rent for the first month in the new city. My grandmother, as always, was the only person who believed in me and supported me. I hugged her, trying to hide the tremor in my voice, and thanked her, whispering words that had been waiting in the wings for a long time. Thank you, Grandma, for seeing me. Our wedding day was both modest and magical, filled with quiet beauty and a special warmth that was so lacking in my past. David and I decided to have the ceremony at the local community center, a simple but cozy place that we put our whole soul into. Instead of a luxurious hall with crystal chandeliers, we were surrounded by garlands of wildflowers, modest but bright, created by our friends, who gladly helped decorate the hall until late the night before. They knew that our wedding would be different from the brilliant celebrations that one would expect from the daughter of two successful doctors, and that was what made our day special. With every look that David cast at me, I felt all the pain that I had been carrying inside for so long disappear. His eyes radiated the same support and warmth that I had been looking for all my life, and every moment it became clearer to me that, despite my modesty, this day was exactly what I dreamed of. As I stood in front of him in a white dress made by my friend, a feeling of happiness and quiet triumph overwhelmed me. It was not about luxury, not about approval, and certainly not about the opinion of parents. It was our day, our own little world, in which only one thing was important to us, each other. Grandma Julie, my savior, was there with a proud and gentle expression on her face. She was sitting in the front row, and when David and I exchanged vows, her eyes sparkled, as if she was the only person in my life who really saw what I was going for and what I overcame to stand here today. There was so much love and understanding in her gaze that I could barely hold back the tears. In her entire life, she has never shown me disappointment, only support and care, quiet and faithful. Her presence gave this day even more warmth and meaning. When the impromptu banquet began, my friends brought home, made treats, pies, cookies, dishes cooked with love, and in the center of the celebration was a cake made by David. It was far from perfect, with slightly slanted layers and uneven glaze, but for me it was perfect. This cake symbolized not just our beginning together, but also our journey full of difficulties and joys, in which every detail spoke of sincere love and support. David held my hand as we stood in a circle of friends, smiling, laughing, genuinely happy for us. The music our friends played was lively and a little discordant, but there was something magical about its simplicity and sincerity. We danced barefoot, laughing with happiness, and with every step in this dance I felt like I was letting go of years of pain and resentment. It was a moment of absolute freedom and joy, a moment when all the other voices that had been trying to guide me for years fell silent, giving way to one, the most important voice, my own. The words that had been accumulating inside me for so long burst out in a torrent that I could not even dream of at family meetings. I saw my parents' faces flush with shame and annoyance, but it only warmed me up even more. Mom, recovering from the first shock, took a step forward, her lips compressed into a thin line, expressing the same cold severity that I knew so well. Meryl, her voice sounded strained, almost hissing, maybe you shouldn't make us look like that. We have put so much love and care into your upbringing, you are ungrateful. You had a choice, we didn't force you to make sacrifices. My hands were shaking with a mixture of anger and pain, and for the first time in my life I was able to answer without trying to drown out the voice of resentment. Inside, everything screamed with the feeling that this struggle for attention, for recognition, had finally become obvious and could no longer be ignored. Are you saying that I voluntarily chose a life full of limitations for myself? I replied, feeling every eye turn towards me. That I decided to take on the debt myself in order to get at least some opportunity to realize my dreams, while my brothers got everything without thinking about the value of these benefits. I chose night jobs and daily savings. I chose the pain of constant rejection, when my every success was devalued by you. Jason and Christopher shifted from one foot to the other, not daring to get involved in this conversation. Their self-confident grins disappeared, replaced by expressions of concern, as if they had heard for the first time and realized that their privileges were not the norm for everyone. The father sighed heavily and tried to put in a word. His tone became low and serious, as if he thought he could regain control of the situation. "Meryl, understand," he began, holding out his hand as if he wanted to physically hold me back. "We were just trying to do the best for all our children. Our priorities may have been different, but that doesn't mean we were unfair." It became impossible to restrain a bitter smile. Deep down, I knew that their justice had always been illusory. Different priorities? I repeated, realizing how the injustice of those words was eating away at me from the inside. "Mom, Dad, don't you understand that your justice was to raise your sons in the belief that the world belongs to them, and I was forced to live in a constant sense of insufficiency? You created a platform for them to build on and succeed, and you forced me to build my life on the ruins of my own efforts." The voices faded, neither of them could find the words, and I could see that the silence had finally made them think. A mixed feeling of pain and relief permeated me, and as I turned to David, I felt his warm support. He held my hand, and his eyes told me that he was here, no matter how painful this conversation turned out to be. Aunt Nicole, always calm and unperturbed, finally broke the silence. She stood up, giving everyone a stern look, which reflected a share of sympathy for me, but also a hidden reproach for my parents. "I think," she said, pursing her lips slightly, "that Meryl deserves a little more understanding." We all saw how she worked, how she achieved her goals without the help and approval that others got. Being a daughter in this family, it seems, never meant being on an equal footing with the sons. Her words, like the sound of a bell, echoed in the hall, making everyone present think about how much injustice and inequality lay behind the facade of this family. I froze, holding the phone to my ear, startled by the fake note of concern in my mother's voice. The words, "We have always believed in you," sounded so alien and insincere that everything boiled over in me. Memories flashed before my eyes, her cold reproaches, hurtful comments, and that sarcastic laughter of my brothers at our wedding. I listened to her eulogies, which made my stomach clench, but I couldn't answer right away. How dare they come back into my life when everything finally started to work out? David, sensing my tension, gently put his hand on my shoulder. There was support and understanding in his gaze. He knew what I had to go through to free myself from the influence of my family, and he felt it all coming back. Gathering my courage, I took a deep breath and spoke, trying to keep my tone calm. "Mom, thank you for the congratulations, but you seem to forget that we have achieved all this ourselves, despite all the obstacles that stood in our way. Everything we are doing now is the fruit of our efforts, and you and Dad have nothing to do with it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear my mother coughing, trying to find the words. Her pride was clearly hurt, but she didn't give up, still hoping to break through the wall that I had so diligently built between us. "Meryl, darling, you know, family is always family." Her voice was more restrained now, but no less intrusive. "We only want your happiness. And with money, well, you now have everything you need to live properly. Maybe you could consider helping your brothers. They've been having difficulties with business lately." Her voice seemed to be coaxing, but the hidden request was obvious, and this angered me even more. For a second, I even thought I had misheard. After all they had done, after all the injections, neglect, and insults, they dared to ask me for help. My family, who had neglected me and David, now suddenly needed me. How bitter and at the same time absurd it was, as if everything had been turned upside down. I looked at David, and he just nodded, as if to say, "Tell them whatever you want." "Mom," I began, feeling my voice grow stronger, "you know that I've spent half my life trying to earn your respect and support. But neither you nor Dad ever really believed in us. And now that we finally have success, do you want to share it?" "No, I don't owe you anything. My support for David and our shared dreams is my family. Everything else is in the past." There was a heavy sigh on the other end, but I didn't listen anymore, realizing that I was ready to break this connection once and for all. I hung up the phone, and a feeling of incredible relief enveloped me. It was as if the chain that had been dragging me down for so long had finally broken, holding me in a place where I never wanted to stay. That evening, sitting next to David, I felt like I was free. We no longer looked back at the shadows of the past, but walked forward, together, along the path we had chosen ourselves. Her raised hand silenced everyone. Her gaze, cold and clear, pierced the brothers, as if pinning them to the floor. In the silence that followed her gesture, Christopher could be heard awkwardly shifting from one foot to the other, trying to hide his confusion. He tried to hide his growing panic behind a cheeky grin, but there was fear and confusion in his eyes, and I felt it with my whole being. Grandma Julie slowly straightened up, like a proud ancient statue, immune to neither time nor the lies that had surrounded her all her life. No one dared to even breathe as she took a step forward. Her soft voice was like a thunderclap in this tense room. "You know," she began, her words calm but steely, "this whole scene reminds me of a story when you were both kids. Then you smiled with the same hypocrisy when you were plotting against your own sister behind your back. Jason, you forged her diary to make her look ungrateful to me, and you, Christopher, once ruined her school project to blame her and make her look irresponsible in front of her parents. I was silent then, believing that these are childish pranks that will pass when you grow up. But what do I see now?" Her words lashed like a whip, exposing forgotten grievances and memories hidden in the shadows. I stood aside, trembling, because finally someone who saw me for who I am, who believed me, came forward and called a spade a spade. "You still haven't grown up," she continued, staring at Jason intently, then looking at Christopher. "All these years you have been playing giveaway, manipulating and pulling everything you could out of us, without thinking about the consequences for others. And here you are, standing here in my granddaughter's new apartment, instead of being happy for her, instead of at least showing respect. You haven't changed. You're still the same moody boys who think the world owes them something." Christopher opened his mouth to object, but Grandma silenced him with a gesture. He seemed to be pressed against the wall, and that domineering gaze didn't give him a chance. Jason, whose arrogance at first seemed indestructible, suddenly wrinkled up, as if the air had been drained from his inflated balloon of pride and narcissism. "Well," Grandma Julie took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts, "if you've been waiting so long for my death to snatch something from what I've accumulated over my life, then you can relax. I rewrote the will." This statement hit the room like a bolt from the blue. Jason and Christopher froze, unable to digest what they had heard. Their faces turned white as a sheet, and a fleeting, barely noticeable smile played on my lips. For the first time in my life, justice turned in my direction, without requiring me to fight or justify myself. Grandma Julie peered into the faces of her grandchildren, as if finally assessing them. She paused, waiting to see if they realized the depth of her words, their true weight. "Yes, that's right," she continued firmly. "Everything I have will remain with Meryl and those who, like David, showed me what sincere love and respect mean. And you too." Her voice trembled, but she controlled herself and looked at them with pity, but without a drop of regret. "I leave you only a reminder of how important it is to be a decent person." It was surprisingly quiet in our new house, but that silence no longer felt like emptiness. It was a cozy, peaceful silence filled with promises that David and I enriched every corner with. Every morning began with the quiet rustle of the coffee machine, the smell of freshly baked buns, and the soft light pouring through the windows framed by curtains, which we chose together with such care, as if every detail was evidence of our new, peaceful life. Grandma Julie has become an integral part of our everyday life. She came to us every week, brought with her favorite albums with family photos, and the three of us looked through them, sometimes wondering how many lives and stories she had put into her memories. She looked at me now in a way she had never looked at before, as a woman who had grown up and found herself, despite all the wounds and pain. Her support filled me with strength, and I felt like I was shedding layer after layer of the past that had kept me in its shadow for so long. Every time Grandma came, she brought lightness and warmth to our table. Her laughter filled the apartment like the scent of fresh cookies that we baked together while David told stories from his youth. It became our ritual, strengthening us as a real family. She seemed to be getting younger, getting rid of years of heaviness, detachment that had once clouded her gaze. Now her eyes sparkled when she looked at me, and every time she touched my hand, she seemed to say without words, "Now everything is right." Nicole also became a close friend, and her visits filled the void that false bonds with my brothers and parents had once created. We talked about the family, about old grievances, which she now openly admitted to seeing, but, being the youngest, did not dare to interfere. She told me how her mother, my aunt, always looked at us with sadness when she saw how my father and mother unfairly bestowed attention on my brothers, but for some reason she did not find the strength to resist. We laughed, drank wine, and discussed books, movies, and dreams, and with each conversation, I felt a friendship built on genuine feelings, not blood ties, returning to my life. Over time, the new friends and acquaintances we met in our neighborhood began to fill our lives with bright moments. They brought us pastries, advised us about favorite restaurants nearby, and shared tips on how to arrange an apartment. David arranged small meetings for the neighbors, invited friends from his company, and in this warm atmosphere, I finally felt that I was appreciated, that I was respected. The apartment turned into a real house, where every object told a story. There were pictures of my grandmother and Nicole and me on the wall, and David's old vase, left over from his grandmother, stood in the hallway as a connecting thread of generations. We decided to leave one window in the living room uncurtained so that the sun would set and flood the room with golden light, as if illuminating our new life and at the same time erasing old shadows. It was our small but important statement of independence, a kind of forgiveness for the past, which I probably will never get from my native family. Sometimes I saw missed calls from my parents, rare messages full of threats and insults. They didn't back down, trying to remind me of my debts to my family, but each time I felt them more distant, like voices from another world. Now I had a family that chose me not because of obligations, not because of inheritance or blood ties, but because I meant something really valuable to them. One evening, when the light of the setting sun flooded the living room, and David was hugging me by the shoulders, and my grandmother was quietly dozing in an armchair by the window, I felt that I had found what I had always longed for, the house that we had created with love, and the people who became my support.